Chapter 370, Sword and Sword. 1. It's because human flesh and blood and their grudges are imbued in these demonic swords. Is that so? At Master O Qianmu's words, Mok Jiangun looked at the magic sword Evil Commandment sword with an interested gaze. He had thought there must be some story behind it because he felt a strong demonic nature from the sword, but to think it contained human flesh and blood. Does that mean a life was sacrificed to make the sword? Is this all? Master O Qianmu frowned. He had expected him to be greatly surprised or disgusted when told what went into the demonic swords, but instead he showed interest, which inwardly made him click his tongue. He had thought he was different from ordinary people, but this went beyond just being bold. Or was his way of thinking entirely different? Then Mok Jiangun asked while looking at the sword. To do this for not just one but 5 swords, was there some special reason? Different. Indeed very different. Inwardly clicking his tongue, O Qianmu soon answered. This lowly one doesn't know the exact reason either. Only a record remains in our family that 5 demonic swords were born at someone's request. You're saying 5 swords were made simultaneously at someone's request? That's correct. What an unusual person. To ask for the creation of not just ordinary swords, but 5 such unique demonic swords. That's why our ancestor considered making these demonic swords shameful. Because they were made with someone's life? Exactly as you say. Then couldn't he have refused? If he had refused, our family line would have been cut off. Ah, I see. Mok Jiangun nodded. So it seems they were born not from a request but under threat. Master O Qianmu sighed and said, It's truly ironic beyond words. Although I couldn't completely subdue the sword's spirit, I never imagined this sword would come to me on the day I completed it. What do you mean? Because today I fulfilled our family's long-cherished wish. Your family's wish? Yes, I created a sword made of Guanya black iron with my own hands. Hearing the subtle excitement in his trembling voice, Mok Jiangun wondered and asked, pointing with his chin at the magic sword Evil Commandment sword. Come to think of it, didn't you say Evil Commandment sword was also made with Guanya black iron? That's correct. Then why do you say it's ironic? Is there a reason you're talking as if it's something special? To this question Master O Qianmu answered while looking at the blade of the magic sword Evil Commandment sword. Guanya black iron is not a metal that can be handled by simple methods. Can't be handled by simple methods. Don't tell me. It's because human flesh and blood and their grudges are imbued in these demonic swords. Suddenly Mok Jiangun recalled what Master O Qianmu had said earlier. He nodded as if agreeing and said, That's right. It's not to make them into demonic swords, but strangely, this special metal called Guanya black iron cannot be melted and shaped without human flesh and blood. Truly a strange metal. Beyond strange, this metal is truly monstrous. The fact that a life must be sacrificed to melt it and create a shape was beyond strange, truly bizarre. That's why among blacksmiths who had carried on their trade for a long time, no one who knew even a little about this Guanya black iron thought of handling it. For them this metal was cursed before it was the best metal. Ah, so that's what it was. Mok Jiangun now understood why he couldn't hide his excitement when he said he had made a sword with Guanya black iron. So he asked, I see. When you said it was your family's wish, do you mean you succeeded in making the sword without using human flesh and blood? To this question Master O Qianmu smiled and nodded. O Yezi, called the greatest craftsman, felt guilt and regret while making these demonic swords with someone's life. However, what distressed him even more was his shame as a craftsman. O Yezi was tormented until the moment of his death because of this Guanya black iron that couldn't be handled without sacrificing someone's life. Because the craftsman couldn't handle the metal and succumbed to it. Thus, this became a generational task and wish for the O clan. As the noble sir said, our O clan has put in effort for generations to wash away the shame of our ancestor O Yezi, and today we have finally completed it. This was why he had been secluding himself and focusing on his work for a while. He had refused to craft swords for many people because he was close to resolving this task. The only regret was, if only I had half a quarter hour more, no, just a quarter hour. Not only could he have fulfilled the wish, but he could have created his greatest masterpiece. But unfortunately it wasn't realized. If only that swordsman and Mok Jiangun who became the noble sir hadn't appeared, the result might have been different. But there was no use lamenting what had already happened. In the end, it wasn't fated to be a masterpiece. I don't know if such a sense will come again, but there's still enough time left. He had achieved his family's wish in his generation. Now he just needed to create the masterpiece of his lifetime. Then he would have no regrets in life. But then he saw Mok Jae-un staring at something. Noble sir. I've been wanting to ask for a while, is that completed sword over there? Mok Jae-un pointed with his thumb. Master Okyeonmu couldn't hide his surprise. This was because there really was a sword where Mok Jae-un had pointed. How did he know? This sword hadn't properly established its sword spirit. This was because his mind had been distracted at the moment he needed to concentrate, causing the sword's spirit to become twisted. Therefore, the sword's aura wasn't well manifested. Moreover, the workshop was overflowing with such incomplete swords, so it was nearly impossible to find it by the sword's aura alone. Roar. However, unlike him, something else was visible in Mok Jae-un's eyes. He could see the natural energy of the surroundings gradually gathering towards somewhere hidden. May I take a look? That sword? No, it's fine. A craftsman doesn't show an improperly completed sword to others and destroys it. That was the stubbornness and pride of a craftsman. But it was the noble sir's order, so it was difficult to refuse, and it seemed a waste to just destroy a sword that could have become a masterpiece after only he had seen it. Please take a look. Mok Jae-un had reached an even higher realm of swordsmanship than himself. There was no harm in hearing his expert opinion. As Mok Jae-un moved his steps to where the final work was done in the workshop, a dark-colored sword came into his view. It didn't even have a scabbard because the work of establishing the sword's spirit was being done. But then, Mok Jae-un's eyes trembled as he looked at it. Okyeonmu, who was behind, couldn't see this, so he spoke with half expectation and half concern. The blade is particularly dark because it's mixed with 10,000-year cold iron. Although it's regrettable that the sword's spirit is twisted, just this alone could be called close to the greatest masterpiece. I wonder if the noble sir finds any lack. Okyeonmu stopped mid-sentence and moved to the side. He had sensed something strange. What? Okyeonmu couldn't hide his puzzlement. This was because Mok Jae-un was staring at the sword with blank eyes, as if in a state of selflessness, as if he had fallen into a mental state. Why? He knew the sword was close to perfect enough to be called a masterpiece. But could one fall into a mental state just by looking at the sword's form? Could he have seen something that he himself couldn't see? In the mental image, the surroundings are quite different from the place he knew. Even the color of the sky is different, and in this strange place where the world seems about to collapse, he was wielding something. It was none other than a sword with a brilliant ink color. That sword looked very similar to the one Master Okyeonmu had made. The only difference was, roar. The sword felt as if it had its own will, and it was incomparably fierce and vicious. And strangely, this ferocity was familiar. This was the roaring demonic nature itself. In the mental image, he wasn't moving of his own will, and his sword movements were rough and clumsy. However, the sword was handling all of him and drawing out his utmost potential. After wielding the sword for a while like that, he finally stopped, and then as he released the force he was applying to the sword, slash 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 slash, the ink-colored sword suddenly split apart and decomposed, changing into the form of a ring. Ah! Mok Jae-un, coming out of the mental image, looked at the sword without a scabbard. He didn't know when he had fallen into it, but this sword was clearly very similar to what he had seen in his mental image. So Mok Jae-un asked Master Okyeonmu beside him, "The sword, did you really conceive and make it yourself?" At this question, Master Okyeonmu's expression instantly hardened. Frowning as if his words were blocked for a moment, Master Okyeonmu spoke in an incomprehensible tone. "May I ask why the noble sir is asking that?" "Because I've seen the sword before." "You mean you've seen this sword, no, a sword in this form before?" "Yes." At these words, even more doubt clouded Okyeonmu's eyes. Puzzled by his reaction, Mok Jae-un asked, "If not, it's fine. It's just that the final completed form of this sword I saw doesn't seem to end with this." Ah! As soon as Mok Jae-un's words fell, a sigh flowed from Master Okyeonmu's mouth. He wondered why he was reacting like that, but soon Okyeonmu approached the ink-colored sword, grasped the handle without a scabbard and lifted it. "There are no absolutes in this world, it seems." "What do you mean?" "I'm truly ashamed." I thought no one would know this because several generations have passed, and I wanted to realize this perfect form with my own hands, but I never imagined the noble sir would know about it. So there was an original sword? That's correct. Tap. With his answer, Master Okianmu put the sword down again and went somewhere. He took out an old worn book from a bookshelf in one corner of the workshop. Having brought the book, the master flipped through it and then opened a certain part to show Mok Jae-eun. A strange light flickered in Mok Jae-eun's eyes as he saw this. This was because the book had detailed records of the sword's form, and even described that it could be decomposed to form a ring shape. What is this? It's a record left by this lowly one's great-grandfather. A record left by your great-grandfather? Then did your great-grandfather make this sword? At that question, Master Okianmu hesitated for a moment and then shook his head. No. At this point, how could I not tell the truth to the noble sir? This is what my great-grandfather recorded after seeing it 100 years ago. 100 years ago. It was older than he thought. Mok Jae-eun couldn't hide his puzzlement. What was that mental image just now? Usually when he saw a mental image, it could be said that he was reading residual thoughts left in traces of enlightenment or remnants. But strangely, upon seeing a newly born sword, he saw a scene that was familiar yet unfamiliar. Does that mean he saw a scene from 100 years ago? Something felt odd. Then Master Okianmu continued speaking. My great-grandfather came to see this sword through a horrific tragedy. A tragedy? Yes. As you know, our O clan rarely leaves this sword valley as we craft swords without rest for even a day, but my great-grandfather agreed to personally deliver a completed sword to fulfill the request of a brilliant female swordsman with whom he had a usual acquaintance. To personally deliver it, they must have been quite close. Looking at the records my great-grandfather left, it seems he built a friendship out of admiration for the female swordsman's delicate yet excellent sword skills. Oh, is that so? Yes, he praised her sword as being like viewing an elegant moon. An elegant moon, you say? Mok Jae-eun's eyes narrowed. The idea of a sword technique reminiscent of the moon suddenly struck him. Among the sword techniques he knew, only two evoked the moon. They were the Moonless Void Sword and Chong Ryong's Moon Sword technique. Then he walked to one side of the workshop and took out one of the wooden boxes piled on top of a shelf. It too was covered in dust, having been neglected for a long time. Tap tap. Master Okianmu, dusting it off with his hand, came carrying the long wooden box and said, "What's that?" "A sword that has lost its owner." Click. As Okianmu opened the wooden box, along with the scent of aged wood that hadn't been opened for a long time, a sword appeared. It was a sword with a blade so white it was pure white. A small exclamation flowed from Mok Jae-eun's mouth at the sight of its radiance that hadn't been lost even after 100 years. Ah! Then Chong Ryong's trembling voice was heard in his ear. "Mortal. What's wrong?" Come to think of it, if it was 100 years ago, that would be when Chong Ryong was alive and active, right? To that question, an completely unexpected answer came from Chong Ryong's mouth. "This is my sword." Chapter 371, Sword and Sword 2. This is my sword. Mok Jae-eun's expression turned strange at Chong Ryong's unexpected words. He had already been thinking of that old man and Chong Ryong when the swordsmanship was said to evoke the moon. Now that Chong Ryong herself claimed to be the owner of this sword, even the usually rational Mok Jae-eun couldn't help but show interest. "Then, are you the female swordswoman Master O mentioned?" Chong Ryong gave no answer to Mok Jae-eun's question. Though she remained silent, Mok Jae-eun's eyes narrowed at the strangely lingering emptiness. At that moment, Master Okianmu pulled out the pure white sword from the wooden box and said, "The sword's name is Sunyin. The female swordswoman named it herself." Sunyin. It was an unusual name for a sword. Written out, it meant yearning. Master Okianmu continued. Normally, a masterless sword should be destroyed or buried with its owner, but... Flinch. At that moment, the famous sword Sunyin in Master Okianmu's hand began to tremble faintly. Okianmu spoke with a puzzled expression at this phenomenon. "Why is the sword?" It had been left neglected in a wooden box for a full 100 years. Yet now the sword was trembling faintly and even emitting a sword cry. It was truly a bizarre occurrence. Perplexed by this, Okianmu muttered, "Sunyin, is it because you've shown yourself to the world after so long? Or..." Okianmu looked at Mok Jae-eun. As a swordsmith who had been crafting swords for many years, he believed that famous swords had their own will. That's why he always finished by capturing the sword's spirit. The reason Oh Qianmu was looking at Mok Jeongun like this was to see if the famous sword Sun Yun was perhaps reacting to seeing its master. Even famous swords choose their master. Could it be that the masterless famous sword Sun Yun was trying to accept this man as its master? Flinch. As he wondered about this, Oh Qianmu suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He sensed an eerie cold that was hard to describe, feeling as if something invisible was present before his eyes. At this, whoosh. As Oh Qianmu tried to raise his aura. It's okay. You don't need to be on guard. You mean this chilling energy? Yes. Master Oh Qianmu was a master who had surpassed the profound realm. His energy sense had already transcended the limits of ordinary humans, reaching a realm where he could even detect spiritual energy. That's why he sensed Chong Ryong awakening from the seal of the wooden doll. Chong Ryong, who had emerged like that, reached out her hand towards the sword blade with a somewhat wistful look in her eyes. The moment her ethereal hand gently touched the blade, Wung, the famous sword Sun Yun emitted an even stronger sword cry, and a brilliant light rose from the blade. Oh Qianmu's eyes shook at this incredibly strange phenomenon. How could a sword that had lost its luster after losing its master show such a display, as if its life had been rekindled? To see you like this, Sun Yun. As Chong Ryong ran her hand along the blade, the famous sword Sun Yun trembled. Could it sense her ethereal presence? Watching this scene in amazement, Master Oh Qianmu said to Mok Jeongun, "In all my decades of forging swords, I've never seen anything like this. It seems the sword has chosen you as its master." At these words, Mok Jeongun smiled faintly and replied, "Perhaps it's because the real owner is nearby." "Owner? What do you mean?" "Well, maybe it's because the spirit of that female swordswoman you mentioned is with me." Master Oh Qianmu frowned. How could the spirit of a female swordswoman who died 100 years ago be with him? He might have been speaking abstractly about the sword's reaction. As he thought this to himself, "I received sword training from the sword's owner. You could consider me a disciple." For a moment, Master Oh Qianmu was dumbfounded. The owner of this sword lost her life just 100 years ago. How could he have received sword training from such a person? "Master, even as a joke this is." "Why would this be a joke?" "Master, that female swordswoman lost her life 100 years ago and had no descendants. That's why the sword has been kept like this until now. The moon sword style. Isn't that the swordsmanship the sword's owner practiced?" As soon as those words fell, Master Oh Qianmu's eyes widened. How could he know this? How is this possible? Oh Qianmu was so shocked that he was momentarily speechless. There was a reason for his reaction. Their family had a tradition of keeping detailed records of the swords they forged. When making swords, they would ask about the swordsman's style to create the most ideal sword for them. The records left by his great-grandfather clearly stated, Sun Yun, moon vein, moon sword style. Moreover, this sword style was so exceptional that his great-grandfather had recommended memorizing it as one of the sword styles. It was right then. Swish swish. Mok Jeongun gripped the sword stance paper and took the basic stance of the moon sword style. Then he lightly demonstrated an abbreviated form of the moon sword style's initial moves. Swoosh 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 swoosh. Master Oh Qianmu, who had learned countless sword techniques and possessed outstanding insight, recognized it at a glance. What shocked him even more was, the sword form has been perfected. The moon sword style left by his great-grandfather was certainly an outstanding sword technique. However, being an ancient style, it had some issues and vulnerabilities in certain sequences, but all of those had been addressed and improved. Seeing this, Oh Qianmu became truly convinced. So Master is the successor of the lost moon sword style? He couldn't tell if Mok Jeongun was a descendant. His great-grandfather had clearly stated that the female swordswoman had no offspring. But what was certain was that Mok Jeongun had inherited the moon sword style. Ah, so that's why. Oh Qianmu nodded as if he finally understood. He had found it strange that Mok Jeongun knew about the original sword of that blade, but now that mystery seemed to be solved. Whether or not they were related by blood, he seemed to know because he was the successor. Is this fate? An exclamation escaped Oh Qianmu's lips. From the return of his ancestor Gu Yijia's demonic blade at the moment their clan's long-cherished wish was fulfilled, to the current owner being the successor of the moon sword style? How incredibly coincidental this all was. This was too deeply connected to be dismissed as mere chance. Speechless with amazement, Mok Jong-un stopped his abbreviated demonstration of the moon sword style and said, "Please continue the story you were telling." "Pardon? You stopped in the middle of talking about the masterless sword. How you came to see that original sword?" "Ah, yes, of course." Right, he had been in the middle of the story. At that moment Chong Ryong, who had been caressing the blade of the famous sword Sunyan while claiming it as her own, hastily turned to Mok Jong-un and said, "Wait, stop. Mortal. What's wrong? Just, can we stop this story here?" She had meant to ask if they could stop, but she halted mid-sentence. Here. She didn't want the story to continue much further. That was because she was the subject of the female swordswoman story Master O Kyeonmu was about to tell, and because of this incident she had become a wandering spirit in this world for 100 years. Of course, Master O Kyeonmu's great-grandfather wouldn't have known the exact details. He would have only witnessed the aftermath. But just hearing it from someone else's mouth was inevitably unpleasant. However, the reason she stopped speaking was for one reason only. What exactly is this original sword? Mok Jong-un had spoken about the ink-black sword made by Master O Kyeonmu as if he knew something. As if that sword had an original version. But according to the records left by Master O Kyeonmu's great-grandfather, that original sword was related to the tragedy of that time. What exactly did you see in your mind's eye? Mortal. Because of this, Chong Ryong was filled with questions. If the original sword of that blade was related to the tragedy of that time, she became curious if it had any connection to him. That's why she had hesitated for a moment before stopping her words. Chong Ryong. Huh. It's nothing. At her reaction, Mok Jong-un clicked his tongue softly. Having been with her for a long time, he could roughly guess what she was trying to say from her tone. She had clearly meant to tell him to stop here, but she gave up on that. It didn't seem to be simply out of resignation. Chong Ryong also seemed to have something she wanted to know. It was then that Master O Kyeonmu put the famous sword Sunyan back into the wooden box and spoke. Connections truly are strange things. It's fascinating to see how everything is linked in some way or another. As Mok Jong-un silently looked on, O Kyeonmu took a deep breath and began his story. To keep his promise to the female swordswoman, my great-grandfather headed towards the border of Guangxi and Guangdong provinces, timed with her society leader enthronement ceremony. Society leader enthronement ceremony? Mok Jong-un looked at Chong Ryong, who was sitting on the table smoking a long pipe. Society leader enthronement ceremony? Chong Ryong silently turned her head, avoiding his gaze. He had guessed she wasn't of ordinary status from her crown-wearing appearance and her habit of referring to herself as this master, but a society leader enthronement ceremony. As he pondered this, Master O Kyeonmu, thinking Mok Jong-un's question was directed at him, said, "You didn't know? Huh. It seems you didn't know this even though you inherited the moon sword style. It's been largely forgotten over the long years, but the Heaven and Earth Society that currently divides the martial arts world into 3 factions was originally called the Heaven-Earth-Moon Society when it was first established. It became Heaven and Earth Society after that tragedy." Heaven-Earth Moon Society? Yes, according to my great-grandfather's diary, the origin of Heaven and Earth Society came from the union of 3 main veins. 3 main veins. He remembered hearing about this briefly from Chong Ryong. She had said that the 3 main veins, Heaven Vein, Earth Vein and Moon Vein, had joined forces to create it. After saying this, Master O Kyeonmu sighed and continued. It was truly a tragic incident. My great-grandfather, arriving late to the enthronement ceremony that was supposed to take place at noon, hurriedly headed for the main hall. As he approached the main hall, my great-grandfather sensed something was amiss. Despite it being the society leader's enthronement ceremony, there was no sign of people, and instead the air was thick with the smell of blood. Moreover, not a single person could be seen near the main hall. Finding this strange, Master O Kyeonmu's great-grandfather rushed towards the main hall. Upon reaching the main hall, my great-grandfather was shocked beyond words. The place was filled with blood and corpses. Swoosh. Mok Jong-un glanced at Chong Ryong. The The smoke rising from her long pipe was enveloping her surroundings, and he could feel the air around them becoming intensely cold. Flinch. The ominous energy has grown stronger. Sensing this, Master Okianmu paused in his speech and instinctively tried to look at the table where Chong Ryong was sitting, but, don't mind it and continue with the story. But, there's no need to pay attention to it. Whoosh. Mok Jiongun gripped the sword stance paper and formed a small hand seal. Immediately, Chong Ryong's spiritual energy that had been filling the workshop was cut off from Master Okianmu. The energy has disappeared. Now please continue. Though Okianmu found this puzzling, he yielded to Mok Jiongun's urging and resumed his story. In the center of the grand hall stained with blood, he found the female swordswoman, or rather the first and last society leader of Heaven Earth Moon Society, Ryu Sowul, who had died with her heart ripped out. For the first time, Chong Ryong's real name was revealed. However, rather than learning her name this way, Mok Jiongun's eyes grew cold as he learned of Chong Ryong's final moments. Chapter 372, Sword and Sword 3. An old man with a grizzled face and gray beard gazed at something with a look of disbelief in his eyes. The old man's name was Moon Hyok. He was renowned as a master swordsmith. What in the world has happened here? The main hall, which he had expected to be bustling and grand for the enthronement ceremony, was completely covered in blood, with dismembered corpses piled up everywhere. There were nearly hundreds of them. What on earth could have happened? What has transpired here, Lady Ryu? As Moon Hyok looked around the hall in shock at the tremendous tragedy, his eyes widened. He hurriedly ran towards a certain spot. In the center lay a beautiful woman in a bright red ornate dress, her face pale and eyes closed. She was none other than Lady Ryu, the female swordsman he had been looking for. Ryu Sowul of the Moon Vein, who was supposed to have her society leader enthronement ceremony today. Moon Hyok bent down and quickly checked the pulse of the fallen woman. His face soon hardened as he felt for her pulse. This can't be. There was no pulse and her body had already grown cold. Judging by the stiffness of her body, rigor mortis had already set in. Moon Hyok stared at the lifeless Ryu Sowul in shock, his gaze eventually moving towards her chest. Her heart. He hadn't noticed at first due to all the blood, but when he slightly lifted her clothes, there was a hole in the center of her chest. It seemed her heart had been ripped out entirely. Plunge. Moon Hyok's fists tightened. How could this have happened? Aside from being a woman, Ryu Sowul was one of the most skilled swordsmen he knew among the countless martial artists. Hadn't she even surpassed the profound realm? How could such a person have lost her life so tragically? Lady Ryu. Woong woong woong. The wooden box he was carrying on his back along with his bundle began to tremble. At this, Moon Hyok muttered. Have you sensed it too? Thud. Moon Hyok set the wooden box down on the floor. When he opened the lid, a pure white sword, newly forged and brimming with vitality, revealed itself. This was her sword, Sunyan. Ryu Sowul had named it herself and asked him to bring it when it was completed, in time for her enthronement ceremony. I completed the finest sword. It was a masterpiece, one of the best among the numerous swords he had crafted. For Moon Hyok, who had come expecting to see her joyful face upon completing the sword, this was utterly disheartening and bitter. The owner had departed this world without even touching the sword. Woong woong woong. As if sensing this, a faint sword cry could be heard. Moon Hyok bit his lower lip hard with trembling eyes. Though in the martial world, where dozens or hundreds die every day, no one could guarantee tomorrow, this was simply incomprehensible. Who could it be? Who on earth could have done this? Ryu Sowul was one of the top masters of her time, and considering the scale of Heaven Earth Moon Society, to commit such a tragedy would require a force of comparable size. Moon Hyok stood up and examined the corpses in the hall. His clan had been demanding to know the sword techniques of the sword owners for generations when crafting swords, so he prided himself on his unparalleled knowledge in this area. Most of the wounds on these corpses were inflicted by swords, so if I examine them closely, there might be some clues. It was likely to be an organization that could stand against Heaven Earth Moon Society. Most probably one of the 9 major sects. At that moment, Moon Hyok frowned. This was because as he examined the sword wounds on the corpses, he found that many of them didn't show signs of any special sword techniques. This can't be. Oh Moon Hayok, who had been examining the corpses with disbelief, was shocked beyond words. He had naturally assumed it was a battle between organizations, but most of the corpses seemed to be the work of a single person. What was even more surprising was that no special sword techniques were used. They were simply slashed with a sword. Overwhelming power. Overwhelming sharpness. That's what these sword wounds showed. The sword had simply been swung, yet nothing could stop it. If any weapon had tried to block it, both the weapon and the wielder were cut down. Most of the sword wounds were decisive blows, cleaving both weapon and body in two with a single swing. A monster. The phrase unstoppable force seemed fitting here. Even if Ryu Soul was a prodigy with the sword, she couldn't have withstood such a monster. It was someone so strong that even he wouldn't want to face them. But then, his eyes narrowed as he examined the traces. Some of the corpses, boom, rumble, rumble, rumble. Just then, Oh Moon Hayok turned his gaze at the sound of a huge roar. As if an earthquake had struck, the main hall shook and sounds echoed from outside. Could the perpetrator of this tragedy still be here? After hesitating for a moment, Oh Moon Hayok raised his energy to his Yangchen point. Pat. His body shot up from the ground. Though he had felt a moment of fear towards the one who had created these sword wounds, he soon calmed his mind. Even if he couldn't face this monster-like being, he felt he should at least identify who the culprit was, if only for the sake of his friendship with Lady Ryu. As Oh Moon Hayok emerged from the main hall, his expression immediately darkened. Tiver. What in the world? His reaction was due to a chilling energy that went beyond stimulating his senses to completely overwhelming them. The more skilled a martial artist is, the easier it is to sense such energy when it's released. But this ferocious and evil energy wasn't confined to a single space. It was overturning everything around, and its scale was hard to fathom. It seemed to fill tens or hundreds of miles. How could a human possess such tremendous energy? He was on the verge of trembling all over, overcome by the pressure. Ha ha. Oh Moon Hayok's breathing became ragged. No matter how much he tried to calm himself, it was difficult to regain his senses amidst this ferocious energy filling everything around him. He could tell where this energy was emanating from, but his feet wouldn't move. The moment he entered this monster's sight, he might die before he even realized it. But then something caught Oh Moon Hayok's eye. Ah! The ferocious energy that had been dominating the surroundings suddenly subsided. What could have happened? At this, he wiped his sweat-soaked forehead with his sleeve and darted towards the source of the energy. It wasn't too far from here. About 2 li northwest of Heaven Earth Moon Society's main complex. Oh Moon Hayok's eyes widened as he arrived at the spot. The sky was covered in dark clouds with a large hole torn through them, and a crimson light reminiscent of sunset poured down to illuminate the ground. Even more bizarre were the several severed mountain peaks and giant shattered rocks floating here and there in the sky, making the entire area feel like a place not of this world. What on earth had happened here? Oh Moon Hayok, who had been staring at this tremendous sight in a daze, soon discovered something. Ah! It was someone standing on top of one of the giant rocks floating in the air. A man with long hair wearing a fluttering black robe held a sword in his hand. It was an ink-black sword, and the moment Oh Moon Hayok saw it, his mouth fell open. Being a craftsman, he couldn't help but be captivated when he saw an excellent weapon, even unintentionally. It's perfect. The moment he saw the ink-black sword, Oh Moon Hayok was instantly captivated by its form. The shape of that sword was ideal beyond comparison to any sword he had ever conceived as a craftsman. Who on earth could have made such a sword? As he was lost in all sorts of imaginings while looking at the sword, Oh Moon Hayok suddenly slapped his own cheek. Slap. What was he doing? This was no time to be captivated by a sword. He needed to memorize that man's face in detail so he could at least seek revenge for the unjustly killed Lady Ryu Soul. But then, an astonishing sight unfolded. The sword the man was holding disassembled itself, transforming into a ring-like shape and settling on his arm. Oh Moon Hayok's face was filled with shock. What was happening? How could a perfectly normal sword disassemble and turn into a ring-like shape? How was such a thing possible? Despite his family having been craftsmen for generations, this was a technique he couldn't comprehend no matter how much he pondered. As he was wondering about this, flinch. Oh Moon Hayok unconsciously took a step back in surprise. This was because the man turned his head and looked directly at him. He had been hiding while suppressing his energy as much as possible, so this was utterly baffling. Was he going to die at this man's hands? As he hesitated on what to do, it happened. Boom. An unbelievable, tremendous sight unfolded before his eyes. A dazzling beam of light poured through the hole in the dark clouds, striking down towards the ground. The light was so bright that he had to close his eyes for a moment. Phong. With a thunderous roar, his body, eyes still closed, was thrown backwards. Oh Moon Hyuk, who had raised his protective energy thinking he needed to shield his body, crashed into various places chaotically. Thud. Kook. After colliding several times, he was finally able to stop, seemingly as the aftermath subsided. Opening his eyes, Oh Moon Hyuk had a dazed expression. He seemed to have been thrown back nearly 100 meters, and looking towards where the beam of light had struck in the distance. There was nothing there, he said. Nothing at all? Yes, my great-grandfather rushed to that spot, but the floating rocks and severed mountainsides had disappeared, and the surrounding area had become like a plain. It was truly a bizarre occurrence. It was enough to make ghosts wail. Master Oh Kyeonmu's great-grandfather, Oh Moon Hyuk, said he felt as if he had been dreaming when he saw this. Neither the crimson hole torn through the dark clouds nor any of the floating objects were visible anymore. To this, Mok Jae-eun asked, "What about that man?" The man Mok Jae-eun inquired about was the long-haired man who had been holding the ink-black sword. According to the records left by Master Oh Kyeonmu's great-grandfather, he was likely the culprit who had ripped out Chong Ryong's heart and caused that tragedy. He vanished. Vanished? Yes, my great-grandfather mobilized even the surviving members of Heaven Earth Moon Society to search for traces of that man. They searched the surrounding area for 3 days and nights but found nothing. Did they only search the immediate area? No. My great-grandfather drew a sketch of the man's appearance from memory and passed it around. For a while, Heaven Earth Moon Society also tried to find the identity of this unknown person suspected to be the true culprit. That's not true. Crash, 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 crash. Before he could finish his sentence, along with a piercing cry that could burst eardrums, numerous objects in the workshop shattered as if exploding. At this sight, Mok Jae-eun turned his head to look at Chong Ryong. Mok Jae-eun's brow furrowed as he gazed at her. This was because the area around where Chong Ryong had been was becoming stained with blood, and her spiritual energy was rising to a chilling degree. What on earth? Master Oh Kyeonmu looked towards where she was with a perplexed expression. Though he didn't have the eyes to see spirits, perhaps due to the rapidly surging spiritual energy, Oh Kyeonmu, who had noticed something flickering, had already drawn his sword. At this, Mok Jae-eun held out his palm towards him as if to stop him and spoke to Chong Ryong using sound transmission. Chong Ryong, let's calm down for now. Without knowing anything. Who are you calling the true culprit? Crack, crack. The wooden floorboards were torn up, rising like thorns. It was as if they were reacting to her vengeful spiritual energy. A strange light flashed in Mok Jae-eun's eyes. This was because in Mok Jae-eun's eyes, which had opened his spirit vision, he could see her surging spiritual energy gradually turning purple. Chapter 373, Sword and Sword 4. Various ancient books on spiritual arts describe it like this. As a vengeful spirit with deep grudges passes through many years without being exorcised or leaving this world, its rank rises. The ranks start with red spirit, the state of a newly formed vengeful spirit; orange spirit, which has enough power to possess or afflict others; yellow spirit, considered dangerous enough to require exorcism due to its harmful effects on humans; green spirit, which has existed for decades and can even influence surrounding objects; blue spirit, which has existed for over 100 years and can affect a wide area, causing auditory and visual hallucinations; indigo spirit, which has existed for over 300 years and is difficult to subdue even with dozens of exorcists working together; finally, purple spirit, which has crossed into the realm of disaster-like evil spirits due to grudges so deep that even after hundreds of years, they remain unresolved in any way. Purple. A strange light flashed in Mok Jae-eun's eyes. After overcoming several crises together, Chong Ryong had also surpassed her original rank and reached indigo spirit, Nam Ryong. And now her spiritual energy had become close to purple spirit. However, since even various ancient texts including the Shan Hai Jing didn't properly describe this being, no one knew if it truly existed. Is the spiritual energy itself changing? Mok Jiong'un let out a hollow laugh at the spiritual energy turning purple. In the end, does the rank of a vengeful spirit change depending on how strong its grudge becomes? But then, blood. Master O Qianmu couldn't hide his bewilderment. This was because blood was gushing out from various places in his workshop, staining the floor red from bottom to top. What kind of bizarre occurrence is this? O Qianmu's energy sense, which had surpassed the profound realm, felt the surroundings being covered by an eerie energy. If that's the case, this must be in the realm of illusion, not reality. If so, unless one's sixth sense awakens beyond the five senses, it would be difficult to escape this illusion. Hugh. Master O Qianmu focused his mind as he drew up his true energy. It's different. Mok Jiong'un turned his head at his appearance. It was an unnecessary concern. As expected of a peerless master at the level of a great patriarch with deep enlightenment, he had immediately grasped the ghost intent realm and was calmly responding to it. The ghost intent realm is created by the strong will of a high-ranking vengeful spirit. Blood realm. This phenomenon unfolding before his eyes was Chongruyong's ghost intent realm, blood realm. However, this wasn't intentionally created, but rather was unfolding due to her anger. Crack, crack. Thorns sprouted from the blood-stained surroundings, closing in on them. At this, Mok Jiong'un looked at Chongruyong and sent a sound transmission. Chongruyong, let's calm down. Move aside. Her anger had reached its peak, and it was directed at Master O Qianmu. Sensing this, O Qianmu raised his sword energy. The areas stained with blood rippled around where the blue sword energy rose. The blood realm created by spiritual energy seemed unable to withstand the strong energy. However, the fact that it was withstanding to the point of merely rippling against the energy of a peerless master who had reached the profound realm seemed to confirm that Chongruyong's spiritual energy had surpassed its original limits. Master, there's an unknown presence in the direction you're looking. Are you sure you're all right? Master O Qianmu asked again for confirmation. Mok Jun held out his palm as if to say it was fine and not to interfere, but killing intent could be felt so strongly it seemed to touch the skin. Of course, Mok Jiong'un was also aware of this, so, whoosh. It might be better if you step out for a moment. Mok Jiong'un waved his hand. Then a profound true energy pushed back the blood behind where Master O Qianmu was standing, creating a temporary space for him to escape through. Please go now. Master, are you sure? Let's go. All right. Russell. It was at that moment. Before Master O Qianmu could exit through the space Mok Jiong'un had created, Chongruyong rose from the blood on the floor. You. Master O Qianmu frowned at the materialized form of Chongruyong, who wouldn't be disturbed by the appearance of a being that clearly didn't look human emerging from the blood. You're making this quite difficult. Mok Jiong'un clicked his tongue as he watched this. Did she move through the blood? Mok Jiong'un, with his ghost eyes, could detect spiritual energy. But this was different from the usual blood realm. If the usual blood realm merely amplified Chongruyong's power and allowed her to materialize hallucinations and illusions with spiritual energy at will, has she become the blood realm itself? It felt as if this realm was Chongruyong herself. That's why she might have transcended space as the blood melted away before their eyes. In the meantime, as Chongruyong stretched out her hand, blood thorns surged up, targeting Master O Qianmu. Of course, O Qianmu wasn't the kind of person to be easily caught by this. Swoosh 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 swish. As O Qianmu lightly swung his sword in a circle, all the blood thorns were cut down. However, the cut thorns were literally liquid. The thorns regrew and targeted O Qianmu again. Swoosh. At this, is that blood-soaked woman the main body? Pat. O Qianmu jumped up to avoid the blood thorns and quickly closed the distance, attempting to cut down Chongruyong with his sword energy. However, before he could, swoosh, Chongruyong's body melted away into blood once again and, swoosh, she appeared behind O Qianmu as he swung his sword energy, trying to cut his back with a sword made of blood. Oh! O Qianmu hastily withdrew his sword energy and darted forward, avoiding her sword. But it didn't end there. Swoosh. The moment Chongruyong swung her sword, the blood created a blade-like formation as if shooting sword energy, chasing after O Qianmu. At this, Oh Kyonmu regained his posture and raised his sword energy again to cut it down, but, swish. At that moment Mok Jae-eun intervened. Swish. With a sharp energy raised from his sword stance paper, he split Chong Ryong's blood sword, Hyol geometry. At this, Chong Ryong consecutively launched sword techniques made of blood. Of course Mok Jae-eun easily cut them down. Swoosh 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 swish. Chong Ryong, angered at being interrupted, shouted with blood-red eyes. Move aside, mortal. It doesn't seem like you'll listen even if I tell you to calm down. Mok Jae-eun sighed lightly and quietly moved his left fingers. Vic. Soldier. Fight. Split. Formation. It was the hand seal of the 9 characters vivification technique. Despite losing her reason to anger, Chong Ryong seemed to be observing Mok Jae-eun's every move as she snorted. Do you think that will work on this master? She knew almost all the spiritual techniques that Mok Jae-eun frequently used. That's why she immediately recognized that those hand seals were for the 4 peaks linking technique, Sabong Yun Chai Sul. At this, she hid her body in the blood of the blood realm. As her spiritual energy surged, she had instinctively grasped new ways to utilize the blood realm. How will you trap me like this? This blood realm itself was her. But then, the place Mok Jae-eun pointed at after forming the hand seal was none other than Pa. 4 invisible pillars rose around Master Oh Kyonmu. Chong Ryong, who could see this despite hiding her body in the blood, was dumbfounded. What Mok Jae-eun had trapped was none other than Master Oh Kyonmu. The pillars erected around him gradually thickened, then surfaces appeared, creating walls to prevent entry. Realizing that invisible something had created walls around him, Oh Kyonmu asked in bewilderment. Master, what is this? Please stay still in there for a moment. I'll resolve this soon. Pirarg. Just then a scream that could tear eardrums echoed all around. Along with it, the space filled with blood shook, creating waves like ripples. Then the blood rose like a tidal wave, surging towards Mok Jae-eun and Master Oh Kyonmu inside the 4 peaks linking technique. Swoosh. The momentum was extraordinary. Purple spiritual energy was contained in the blood, looking as if it would sweep away everything before it. Watching this, Mok Jae-eun spoke as if whispering. If you don't want to get hurt, stay right in the middle of where I'm looking. Cool. At that moment, as Mok Jae-eun made a gesture of gripping a sword in the air, space rippled and something faintly took the form of a sword. It was none other than Invincible Sword. Oh Kyonmu exclaimed in recognition. The realm where even energy, Gi, forms a sword, said to be achievable only by those who have reached true sword extremity, Geometry Guk. That was the Invincible Sword. Mok Jae-eun, gripping the Invincible Sword, held it in reverse and struck it down into the blood-red floor that was heaving like waves. Swish. At that moment, centered on where the Invincible Sword struck, blood surged in all directions, revealing the floor beneath. From the exposed floor, 8 strands of sharp, formless energy rose up. Swoosh 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 swoosh. It was the 8 Immortal Sword Competition, Palsean Dujeong, one of the extreme sword techniques used by swordsmen. Mok Jae-eun had embodied this technique into swordsmanship and was now deploying it with the Invincible Sword. Its power was incomparable to the original. In an instant, the 8 strands of energy spread throughout Chong Ryong's entire blood realm, splitting the whole space. Crack. As the blood-red space split, the blood realm eventually shattered into pieces. Seeing this sight, Oh Kyonmu inwardly marveled and felt that his choice had been correct. The master was truly a monster. If he had competed with him for the sake of pride earlier, he would have surely lost his life. Moreover, he wouldn't have seen such an incredible sword technique. Crack crack crack. In the center of the shattering blood-red fragments of the blood realm, someone could be seen shedding tears of blood with a sorrowful face. It was Chong Ryong. Only the spot where she stood was unharmed, untouched by the Invincible Sword's cuts. Mok Jae-eun called out to her. Chong Ryong. Swish. Chong Ryong, shedding tears of blood, glanced at Mok Jae-eun, then bit her lower lip hard and flew away, passing through the ceiling of the workshop. Seeing this, Mok Jae-eun said to Master Oh Kyonmu with a hardened expression. Let's continue our conversation later. Pat. Boom. Mok Jae-eun smashed through the ceiling where Chong Ryong had passed and left. Master Oh Kyonmu stared blankly at this, then lowered his gaze to look at the workshop. His workshop, split into 8 parts all the way to the interior, was swaying and barely holding up. Deep wrinkles formed between Oh Qianmu's brows as he looked at the workshop, passed down for generations, which seemed about to collapse at any moment. On a mountain peak not far from Spiritual Sword Sanctuary, Chong Ryong stood on the peak, gazing with sad eyes towards the west, which had turned red as the sun was setting. Mok Jiong'un quietly approached behind her. At this, she spoke without turning her head, still looking at the setting sun. "Leave me alone for a while." Mok Jiong'un stopped in his tracks at her trembling voice. He had felt her grudge before, but he had never seen her look sad or struggle like this. Staring at her like this, Mok Jiong'un eventually spoke. "Are you having a hard time? If it looks that way, can't you just leave me alone?" Chong Ryong was rejecting his continued approach. To her, Mok Jiong'un said, "You've been alone all this time. I just can't leave you alone." "What?" Step, step, step. Mok Jiong'un, who had stopped, walked to where she was. As he tried to face her to see her face, she sharply turned her face away, avoiding it. She bit her lip and held back the emotions welling up inside her. Mok Jiong'un, watching her trembling shoulders, eventually embraced her from behind. At Mok Jiong'un's action, the emotions she had been holding back burst forth like a dam breaking. With a tearful face, she shed tears of blood and spoke. "It's hard. It's so hard. 100 years as a vengeful spirit." Her grudge was deep to the point of being piercing, but she was also piercingly lonely. She had endured the long years with the sole determination to somehow resolve her grudge, if only for the sake of the Moon Vein members who had died following her. But, why are you shaking me like this when I've endured only for this purpose? Chapter 374. That day 1. Long ago. More than 100 years before the present. On the north, east, and west sides of a large training ground sat 3 extraordinary middle-aged men, each guarded by what appeared to be their escorts. These 3 middle-aged men were swordsmen from the 3 veins that had branched off from a single origin long ago. To the north was the Heaven Vein, to the west was the Earth Vein, and to the east was the Moon Vein. They had been periodically meeting every year to exchange martial arts through sparring matches, and today was that day. Crack. The sound of something breaking echoed throughout the training ground. It was the sound of a wooden sword shattering. At this, Ryu Gang, the head of the Moon Vein sitting on the east side, frowned. This was because there was a beautiful young woman holding the broken wooden sword, and she was his only heir. Damn it! A harsh sound burst from the woman's lips. Hearing this, Ryu Gang, the head of the Moon Vein, raised his voice while remaining seated. Ahem. I was just unlucky. If only the wooden sword hadn't broken. The woman, who appeared to be around 18 years old, spoke as if complaining but then stopped mid-sentence. Her gaze was fixed on the tip of a wooden sword touching her neck. The handsome young man holding this wooden sword. He was Bai Yonghian, the heir of the Heaven Vein. Bai Yonghian grinned mischievously in contrast with his handsome face and said, "Luck is also a skill, isn't it? You're really annoying. A win is a win, so you'll keep your promise, right?" "Humph, who said I wouldn't?" The woman snorted and then threw the broken wooden sword to the ground. Seeing her behavior, Ryu Gang, the head of the Moon Vein, rubbed his forehead as if he had a headache and shook his head. Growing up like such a tomboy. She had grown up like a real tomboy even without a mother. Of course he had raised her that way. After his firstborn son and younger brother died of an unknown illness, the only one who could succeed him was his sole daughter, Ryu Sowol. So he raised her more like a man than a woman. At that moment, Yusun, the captain of his guard sitting to his right, smiled and said, But master, the young lady's swordsmanship has improved tremendously. It's Junior Head. I apologize. In any case, Junior Head has made great progress. Who would have thought she'd improve this much when just 3 years ago she couldn't even beat the Earth Vein's heir? She still has a long way to go. At this level, she's still far from being worthy of being called Junior Head. But master, don't you know how much the Heaven Vein's heir was going easy on her? That child is acting like this because she knows that and is frustrated. At these words from Master Ryu Gang, Guard Captain Yusun closed his mouth. He too had guessed this to some extent. The swordsmanship of Bai Yonghian, the Heaven Vein's heir, had reached an excellent level that was hard to believe for someone so young. He was already comparable to the top masters of each vein. If only Hun were still alive. Master Ryu Gang muttered softly as if regretful. Ryu Hun was his deceased son. He was a promising talent of the Moon Vein, said to have martial talent even greater than Bai Yonghian. He had hoped that on the day of the Three Veins unification ceremony, as per the long-standing agreement, that child would defeat the heirs of the other two veins and become the leader of Heaven-Earth-Moon Society, formed by the union of the three veins. But that child had died and left his side. As he was feeling regretful like this, a subdued voice was heard. Yes, things would have been different if my brother were here. It was Ryu Sowol's voice. Master Ryu Gang, who hadn't been aware of her approaching, felt a pang of regret. But she had already run out of the training ground with a hurt expression. He had hurt that child again. He had tried his best not to make verbal mistakes, but as the gap seemed to widen over time, he had unknowingly revealed his true feelings. Master. Guard Captain Yu soon called out to him with a disappointed look. Oh, why didn't you tell me she was coming? Who was lost in thought when she was approaching right in front of us? Right. It's all this master's fault. And cleaning up after the master is always my job. Huayun, Deputy Captain. Yes, Captain. At his call, a woman with a sturdy face who appeared to be in her early 30s stepped forward. Guard Captain Yu soon gave her an order. Comfort Junior Head and bring her back. Understood. Pat. As the deputy captain called, Huayun followed after her. Master Ryu Gang clutched his throbbing head and stood up from his seat. Let's go back. Master, over there. But then someone was seen approaching. It was Bai Hyongmyeong, the current head of the Heaven Vein. Although they had been seeing each other every year recently, he had changed a lot since his father's funeral 3 years ago. He had become less talkative and his whole demeanor had changed, you could say. As he approached looking like he had something to say for the first time in a while, Master Ryu Gang couldn't hide his puzzlement. In truth, he didn't really want to talk after Ryu Sowol's defeat. Ryu Sowol was running out of the Heaven Veins estate. Someone caught up with her and blocked her path. Sowol. It was Bai Yonghian, the heir of the Heaven Vein. She raised one eyebrow and spoke with an annoyed voice. Why are you following me? Were you planning to just leave without keeping your promise? You're really persistent. No, what's persistent about claiming what was promised? At his words, Ryu Sowol clicked her tongue, then tore off an ornate jade orb accessory hanging at her waist and threw it. Bai Yonghian caught it with a smile. She said to him with displeasure. Even if it was a bet, do you really have to take something someone cherishes to feel satisfied? It's special because it's something you cherished. What? It's nothing. Anyway, I'll take good care of it. Or do you want to make another bet? I'll give it back if you win in our next match. No thanks. Do you think I'd want something that's been in someone else's hands? Don't be like that. Enough. If you're done, I'm leaving. No, wait, I have something else to say besides this. Something to say. Although she wasn't in a good mood after losing a cherished accessory, she stopped to listen since he seemed quite serious about having something to say. As she turned her head, Bai Yonghian spoke, fidgeting slightly unlike his usual self. You know, Sowol. What? Hurry up and say it, man. No, why are you rushing? We haven't seen each other in a while. We've seen each other, that's enough. Why are you hesitating and fidgeting like that when you said you had something to say? In truth, Ryu Sowol knew. She had noticed for some time that he was showing signs of liking her. Every time they met, he would blush and avoid meeting her eyes. One would have to be a fool not to notice. But she didn't feel the same way. To her, he, the heir of the Heaven Vein, was someone to be compared against and a mountain to be conquered. That's why Ryu Sowol couldn't bring herself to like him. No, I'm not doing this on purpose. Hey, it's late. I need to run away, you know. If you have something to say, tell me next time. Pat. With those words, Ryu Sowol immediately used her lightness skill and jumped over the estate wall. Seeing this, Bai Yonghian bit his lip hard and was about to follow her but then stopped. He had heard someone calling from behind. Junior Head. It seemed to be the Moon Vein's deputy guard captain. Knowing he would only be interfering if he followed, Bai Yonghian couldn't help but feel regretful. Pat. Ryu Sowol displayed her nimble lightness skill as she cut through the undergrowth. Almost there. Among the many mountain peaks, there was one particularly special place. This mountain peak, which held a place she treasured like a treasure, was the highest and most scenic. She had discovered it by chance 3 years ago and had been visiting it every year since then. The circumstances that led her to find this place were quite amusing. It was after she had fled from her father's disappointed gaze following her defeat in a sparring match, just like today. She had climbed up there after running for several ri without rest to shake off the deputy guard captain and guard warriors sent by her father, Master Ryu Gang. There she was mesmerized by the red-tinged sky and the setting sun. Could there be anything more mysterious and beautiful in the world? For the first time she felt comfort for her tired and wounded heart. After her mother, older brother and younger uncle had died of illness, her father had raised her strictly and sometimes didn't hesitate to say hurtful things. The one who will become the next head is no longer a woman. If your brother were alive, do you think you'd even be worthy of that position? Behave like a proper heir. Because of this, she grew up differently from other daughters. She grew up like a tomboy, but the wounds inside had festered. However, after seeing that scenery when she was struggling, she found solace in her heart and visited that mountain peak whenever she felt stifled, making various excuses. Junior head. The voice of Deputy Guard Captain Wyan echoed from afar. Perhaps because she had chased after her every time she ran away, her lightness skill had definitely improved compared to before. If she didn't hurry up the mountain peak, she might be caught. Pat. Pat. She climbed the treacherous cliff of the mountain peak. It was quite difficult at first, but now she was so familiar with it from frequent visits that she felt she could climb it with her eyes closed. The sun was about to set soon, so she was excited. Full of anticipation, she climbed to the top of the mountain peak and was about to let out a small exclamation when she couldn't do it. This was because on top of the mountain peak, which she had considered her own secret paradise, stood a long-haired man with his hands behind his back, his black robe fluttering. Her face, which had been expecting to see the breathtaking scenery, immediately turned to disappointment. Who on earth is that guy? Who is he to come first and monopolize her personal paradise? As she was wondering about this, at that moment, someone pressed down on her shoulder and slammed her to the ground in one swift motion. Ryu So-woo, thrown to the ground, couldn't hide her bewilderment. The force pressing down on her shoulder was so strong that even though she instinctively raised her inner energy, she couldn't move at all. Eek. Stay still. Let go. Ryu So-woo struggled with all her might, but she eventually had to submit to the overwhelming force that felt like being crushed by a massive rock. Meanwhile, the man who had been standing with his hands behind his back, looking at the scenery she had considered her personal paradise, turned his head and approached. The moment she saw the man's face, she inadvertently let out a gasp. Despite having black hair and skin similar to hers, he had a strangely exotic and beautiful face. Could a man be this beautiful? Even someone like her who had little interest in appearances couldn't help but be surprised. The man who had been staring at her intently opened his mouth. Is it a female? Yes, it seems so. Wish. At that moment, the man dressed entirely in black raised his hand, cutting off what the other was saying. Then, as if uninterested, he waved his hand dismissively and said, "Kill her and dispose of the body. I obey your command." Grip. With those words, the one pressing down on Ryu So-woo's shoulder applied even more force. She should have been scared, but strangely, a strong defiance arose in her in this situation and she shouted, "Female? What a shitty way to talk. You fucking male." The man who had been about to turn away as if he had lost interest stopped. The one pressing down on her shoulder became flustered and applied more force while raising his voice. "How dare you, you worthless." "Quiet. But leave her be for now." "What?" "I said leave her alone." At this, the one who had been about to crush Ryu So-woo's shoulder released his grip. She quickly got up and drew the sword at her waist. Regardless, the man raised the corner of his mouth and said, "An interesting female indeed." Again. As he called her a female again, she angrily unsheathed her sword towards the man without hesitation. It was the fastest quick sword technique in the moon. Sword style. Pat. At that moment, an unbelievable thing happened. The man had effortlessly caught her prized quick sword between two fingers. "You know how to use some force, female." Who are you?" To her surprised question, the man answered in an arrogant voice. "I am the one who will become your master." At those words, her surprise was momentary and she spoke incredulously. You're completely insane,